Silence doesn't arrive loudly. It slips in, locks the door from the inside, and dares you to notice. Gary, Indiana, spring 1963. The house was awake before the sun, but something inside it was wrong. I knew it before I could explain it. A mother always does. The walls were the same thin walls. The floor still complained with every step, and the air smelled of yesterday's cooking and ironed clothes drying too slowly. Yet the house felt as if a sound had been stolen from it. Not taken gently, taken deliberately. Michael was 5 years old. At that age, he never woke in silence. He hummed before he spoke. He sang before he thought. Even half asleep, even sick, even sulking, there was always something. Breath shaped into sound, sound shaped into comfort. That morning there was nothing. I stood still in the hallway, listening. Nothing answered me. That was the first crime scene, not a room, not a body, but an absence. Silence so clean it felt intentional. Silence that didn't belong to a child. I opened his door slowly, as if sound itself might shatter if I moved too fast. Michael was sitting up in bed, eyes wide, hands clenched in the blanket. He looked smaller than he had the night before, as if the quiet had taken something physical from him. When he saw me, his mouth opened. No sound came out. He tried again. I saw the effort before I heard anything, because there was nothing to hear. His throat moved, his chest lifted, air escaped, but it carried no voice with it. It was like watching someone shout underwater. For a moment, just a moment, I told myself it was nothing. A sore throat, a bad night. Children lose their voices all the time. Mothers survive on excuses like oxygen. But my body didn't believe the lie. I knelt in front of him and asked him to say my name. He nodded quickly, too quickly, like someone afraid of failing an exam he didn't understand. His lips formed the word. I could read it perfectly. Still nothing. That was when fear stopped being abstract. This wasn't dramatic. There were no alarms, no sudden collapse. That's what made it worse. The quiet stretched, elastic and suffocating, turning minutes into interrogations. How long had this been happening? Had it started in the night? Had he cried without sound and I hadn't heard him? Guilt arrived early and stayed. Michael tried again, harder this time. I could see it, the strain, the confusion, the panic tightening behind his eyes. 5-year-olds aren't supposed to know what panic feels like, but he knew it then. He pushed, forcing his small body to obey him. Nothing. I pulled him into my arms, feeling his heartbeat racing like it was running from something. He clung to me as if I might disappear too. I whispered to him that it was okay, that he was safe, that we would fix this. I spoke enough words for both of us, trying to fill the silence before it swallowed him whole. Inside my head, another voice whispered questions I didn't want to hear. What if this wasn't temporary? What if the sound never came back? People later would invent reasons. They always do. Some would say it must have been strain, that a child who sings too much pays a price. I need to be clear. Those are rumors, interpretations layered on afterward. In that moment, there was no theory, only a child who could not make himself heard. Hours passed in fragments. I watched him closely, too closely, analyzing every breath like evidence. He drank water. He swallowed carefully. He tried to laugh at something his brother said and froze when no laugh came out. The confusion on his face cut deeper than fear. Confusion suggests betrayal by the body, by the world, by something you trusted. Every so often he tried again. Each attempt felt more desperate than the last. His eyebrows pulled together, his fists clenched. His whole being leaned forward as if his voice were just beyond reach and he could drag it back through sheer will. Then it happened. Not a word, not a cry, a sound, a single note, thin and trembling, escaped him, barely there, like a match struck in the wind. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't strong, but it existed. I froze. That note felt impossible, not because of how it sounded, but because of what it cost him. I saw it drain him, saw the effort ripple through his small frame. That sound wasn't free. It was forced out of a place deeper than habit or talent. It came from instinct, from survival. Michael looked at me, eyes searching my face, asking a question he couldn't voice. I nodded, tears burning but unshed. I heard you, I said softly. I heard you. The relief didn't solve anything. If anything, it made the danger clearer. This wasn't over. This wasn't fixed. The silence hadn't left. It had only cracked, just enough to remind us it was still there, watching. That day taught me something I would never forget. Silence can be active. It can stalk. It can wait. And in that quiet house in Gary, Indiana, with a 5-year-old boy learning how fragile sound could be, I understood that whatever had taken hold of my child was not done yet. It had only begun. The silence didn't retreat. It regrouped. By the second day, I realized we were no longer waiting for sound to return. We were negotiating with its absence. Every hour felt like a countdown whose end no one could see. The house moved around us, life insisting on continuing, while I stayed locked inside one single question. How long can a child exist without his voice before something inside him breaks? Michael followed me everywhere, not because he was afraid to be alone, but because he was afraid to try and fail again without witnesses. When he needed something, he tugged at my sleeve, pointed, mimed. Each gesture felt like evidence in a case no one had prepared for. I watched him closely, the way detectives watch suspects. Except I was watching my own child, searching for clues his body refused to explain. His eyes had changed. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone else to notice, but I saw it. A cautiousness had settled there, a hesitation that didn't belong to a 5-year-old. He was thinking before acting now, measuring effort, calculating risk. Sound had become dangerous. Every attempt to speak carried the threat of disappointment, and disappointment, especially repeated disappointment, can do quiet damage to a child's mind. I could almost hear his thoughts, even when I couldn't hear his voice. What if nothing comes out again? What if I try and fail? That fear sat between us like a third presence. People think silence is peaceful. They're wrong. Silence interrogates you. It asks questions you don't want to answer and waits patiently until you do. I began to notice how loud everything else became. The ticking clock, the scrape of a chair, the distant hum of the street outside. The world hadn't gone quiet. Only Michael had. At one point, he tried to hum. It was instinctive. I saw it happen before he did. His lips shaped the beginning of a sound he had made 1,000 times before, something familiar and safe. Halfway through, he stopped himself. His face tightened, and he shook his head as if correcting a mistake only he could see. That moment hurt more than the silence itself, because it meant he was learning to restrain something that had once been natural. And once a child learns to hold back a part of himself, it doesn't always come back unchanged. I told him it was okay to try. I told him it didn't matter what came out, but reassurance only goes so far when the body refuses to cooperate. Trust, once shaken, doesn't return on command. Later, much later, people would talk. They would build stories around this moment, speculate that it shaped the way he sang, the way he used his voice, the way he protected it. I need to say this clearly. Those are interpretations, not diagnoses. At the time, there were no grand conclusions, only a mother watching a child struggle to reclaim something invisible. The day stretched on, heavy and slow. Michael grew quieter, not just in sound, but in presence. He sat still longer, watched more, as if he were afraid that moving too much might cost him whatever fragile connection to sound he still had. Then came another attempt. This one wasn't impulsive. It was planned. I saw him take a breath and prepare himself, shoulders lifting slightly, jaw setting with determination that felt far too adult. This wasn't a child experimenting. This was someone bracing for impact. The sound that came out wasn't a word. It wasn't even a clear note. It was a strained, broken fragment of sound, air scraping past resistance shaped by effort rather than ease. But it was louder than before, stronger, enough to startle both of us. Michael's eyes widened, mine filled. For a split second, hope flared dangerously bright, too bright. Because hope, when it rises too fast, can burn just as painfully when it falls. He tried again immediately. Nothing. The silence snapped back into place, cruel and efficient, as if it had only stepped aside to remind us who was in control. Michael's face collapsed, not into tears, but into something worse, resignation. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about sound. This was about power. His body had taken control away from him, and he didn't understand why. Children need to believe their bodies belong to them. When that belief cracks, fear moves in quickly. I pulled him close again, holding him tightly, grounding him in something solid and real. I whispered reassurances he couldn't answer. I became his voice when he couldn't be his own. Inside, my thoughts raced dark corridors I didn't want to explore. I wondered what damage silence could do if it stayed too long. I wondered what part of him might change permanently if this continued. The house felt like it was holding its breath with us. By nightfall, exhaustion settled over him. Not the kind that comes from play, but the kind that comes from effort without reward. I laid him down, watching his chest rise and fall, listening for any sound, any hint that the night might give back what the day had taken. There was none. As I turned off the light, one truth pressed heavily against my chest. Whatever had taken Michael's voice was not finished, and whatever it would take to bring it back, we were only at the beginning. The night did not heal him. It only taught the silence how to wait. Morning came without ceremony, pale light sliding through thin curtains like an accomplice that didn't want to be seen. I had hoped, irrationally, desperately, that sleep would reset everything, that he would wake up and speak as if nothing had happened, as if the last 2 days were some cruel misunderstanding. He didn't. Michael opened his eyes slowly, cautiously, as though afraid of what the day might ask of him. For a moment, he simply lay there, listening. I could see it in his face. He was checking himself before he checked the world, testing something internally, quietly, without risk. That hesitation told me more than words ever could. He sat up and looked at me. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He shook his head once, a small, controlled motion. A decision had been made, not yet, or maybe not again. Silence had become strategic. I stayed close to him that day, closer than usual, like a guard who refuses to leave a witness unattended. Every movement felt loaded with meaning. Every breath sounded louder than it should have. I kept listening for something, anything, that might signal a change. It came without warning. We were alone in the room when he stopped walking and turned toward me. His expression was different this time, focused, severe. The fear was still there, but it had been compressed into something sharper. Michael placed one hand against his chest. That was when I knew this attempt would be different. He inhaled deeply, too deeply for a child his size, and held it, as if gathering courage from the inside. His body stiffened, his neck tightened. I could see the effort ripple through him, muscles engaging for a task no one had taught him how to do. This wasn't play. This wasn't instinct. This was force. The sound that came out was not loud, but it was real. A single note, strained, trembling, imperfect, pushed its way into the air like it had been dragged from somewhere painful and hidden. It cracked slightly at the edges, as if unsure it was allowed to exist. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. That note felt impossible. Not because it was remarkable in any musical sense, but because I could see what it cost him. That sound did not come from ease or habit. It came from pressure, from will, from a child deciding, consciously, to fight his own body. Michael's eyes locked onto mine, wide and searching, waiting for confirmation that he hadn't imagined it. "I heard you," I said immediately, my voice steady even as everything inside me shook. "I heard that. His shoulders sagged with relief so sudden it scared me. It was as if he had been holding himself together by a single thread and had finally been allowed to let go. The effort drained out of him all at once, leaving him pale, exhausted, fragile. And still, he tried again. Nothing came out. The silence reclaimed the space instantly, efficiently, like it had never left. The contrast was brutal. One moment there was proof. The next, denial. Michael's face twisted, confusion and frustration colliding in a way no 5-year-old should have to process. He pressed his lips together hard, fighting tears that threatened to break loose. This wasn't just about not being heard anymore. It was about uncertainty. If the sound could come once and vanish again, then nothing was predictable. Nothing was safe. His own voice had become unreliable, an untrustworthy witness that showed up only when it felt like it. I pulled him into my arms before the fear could harden into something permanent. He leaned into me without resistance, his small body trembling slightly. I felt his breath against my neck, warm and wordless. That was when I understood something that chilled me. This wasn't just a physical struggle. It was psychological now. He had learned that sound could betray him, that trying could lead to failure. That effort did not guarantee outcome. Those are lessons adults struggle with, lessons that shape behavior, caution, control, and Michael was learning them far too early. Later, people would analyze moments like this from a distance. They would connect dots, suggest meanings, speculate about influence and impact. I say again, those interpretations came later. In that room, in that moment, there was no mythology, only a child fighting for something basic and a mother realizing how thin the line was between resilience and damage. As the day went on, Michael spoke less, not because he couldn't, but because he chose not to try. Each attempt now carried weight, risk, emotional cost. Silence, in contrast, felt safer. That terrified me more than the absence of sound, because silence was no longer the enemy. It was becoming a habit. That night, as I watched him fall asleep, his face finally peaceful in exhaustion, one thought repeated itself with relentless clarity. If his voice returned, it would never be taken for granted again. And if it didn't, something else would rise in its place, something shaped by fear, control, and the memory of a note that once existed, and then didn't. By the fourth day, I stopped counting hours. Time had lost its usefulness. What mattered now were intervals, the space between attempts, the silence between breaths, the distance between hope and disappointment. Each gap felt dangerous, as if something unseen was tightening its grip the longer we waited. Michael had changed again, not outwardly, not in ways others would immediately notice. But to me, every shift in his behavior rang like an alarm. He moved carefully now, conserving energy as if his body had taught him a harsh lesson. Waste nothing. His eyes followed sound more than ever. Doors closing, footsteps passing, voices overlapping, like he was studying something he feared losing permanently. I caught him touching his throat when he thought I wasn't looking. Not in pain, in doubt. That single gesture stayed with me. It was quiet, almost unconscious, but it told a story words never could. He no longer trusted that part of himself. His own body had become suspicious territory. I lived on the edge of two fears. One whispered that forcing sound might cause harm. The other screamed that doing nothing might cause something worse. A child's mind fills silence quickly, and not always with kindness. I could already see the beginnings of it. Hesitation where there once was confidence, restraint where there had been instinct. And underneath it all, guilt. A mother's guilt doesn't need logic. It doesn't need evidence. It exists simply because something went wrong on your watch. I replayed moments endlessly, searching for signs I might have missed, choices I might have made differently. The mind becomes its own interrogation room when fear is in charge. There were rumors, later, always later. People would say things, imply causes, draw conclusions. I want to be clear. At that time, there were no definitive answers, only uncertainty layered on top of fear. Anyone who claims certainty about those days is rewriting history with the comfort of distance. What I knew then was this: Michael was afraid, and fear, when left unchecked, rewrites behavior. I tried to keep life normal. Routine can be a form of protection. Meals at the same time, familiar tasks, familiar faces. But nothing felt normal when every conversation passed over him instead of through him. He listened more than he participated, watched more than he acted. At one point, someone asked him a simple question. He froze. I saw the calculation happen in real time. Should I try? Should I risk it? The moment stretched too long. Finally, he shook his head and looked at me, silently handing the responsibility back. I answered for him. That was the moment my heart cracked, because helping him was necessary, but replacing him, becoming his voice, felt like crossing a line I never wanted to approach. Children learn who they are by being heard. What happens when they learn it's safer not to speak at all? That night, I prayed. Not loudly, not with ceremony, quietly, internally, the way you do when you're afraid to ask for too much. I didn't pray for fame or talent or future. I prayed for something far smaller and far more urgent. Let him trust his voice again. Faith doesn't erase fear, but it can give it somewhere to rest. I needed that. So did he, even if he couldn't say it. Before bed, Michael surprised me. He didn't try to speak. He didn't force a sound. Instead, he leaned against me and placed his head on my shoulder, listening to my breathing. Slowly, he matched it. In and out, in and out. It was the calmest I'd seen him in days. That was when it hit me. Sound didn't just come from the throat. It came from safety, from permission, from the belief that trying wouldn't hurt. I whispered to him, not instructions, not encouragement, just presence. I let my voice exist around him without demanding anything in return, no pressure, no expectation. His fingers tightened slightly in my sleeve. That small response felt like progress. As I laid him down and turned off the light, the house settled into its familiar nighttime quiet. But this silence was different. It wasn't empty. It wasn't hostile. It was waiting. And as I stood there in the dark, watching my 5-year-old son sleep, one truth pressed heavily into my chest. Whatever happened next would matter. Whether his voice returned fully, slowly, or in fragments, the way this moment resolved itself would follow him. Silence had already left its mark. Now it was up to us, carefully, painfully, to decide what would be written over it. The edge between healing and harm was thin, and we were standing right on it. Silence did not disappear all at once. It hesitated. The morning it changed, there was no announcement, no warning, no dramatic shift in the air. If I hadn't been watching him as closely as I was, I might have missed it entirely. Michael was sitting at the table, tracing invisible shapes with his finger, lost somewhere inside his own thoughts. I was nearby, careful not to hover, careful not to turn every second into a test. Pressure had become the enemy, expectation, a loaded weapon. Then I heard it, not clearly, not confidently. A sound slipped out of him by accident. It wasn't forced. That was the difference. It wasn't dragged out by effort or will. It escaped, small, unguarded, almost surprised to find itself alive. A fragment of voice, fragile but real, hung in the space between us. Michael froze. So did I. Time stretched thin, like a wire pulled too tight. His eyes widened, not with triumph, but with fear, as if he didn't trust what had just happened. He lifted a hand to his throat instinctively, checking whether the sound had truly come from him. I didn't react right away. That was deliberate. I had learned something over those days. Sound needed room. Celebration could crush it just as easily as fear. So I stayed calm, steady, present. I let the moment breathe. Michael tried again. This time it wasn't silence that answered. His voice came out uneven, quiet, uncertain, but unmistakably there. Not singing, not projecting, just existing. A child's voice, reclaiming its place cautiously, like someone returning to a house they weren't sure still belonged to them. I felt my chest tighten. He looked at me, searching my face, reading it the way children do when they're deciding whether something is safe. I nodded slowly, offering confirmation without overwhelming him. "That's you," I said softly. "That's your voice." Something shifted behind his eyes. Not joy, not yet. Relief, maybe. And something else. Awareness, as if he understood suddenly that his voice was not guaranteed, that it could leave, that it could return, that it mattered. He didn't push it further. He didn't test its limits. He let it rest. And that restraint, that instinct to protect what had almost been lost, told me more than any sound ever could. Over the rest of the day, his voice appeared in pieces, short phrases, single words, sometimes nothing at all. It wasn't a clean recovery. It wasn't a miracle. It was cautious, uneven, human, real. I noticed how carefully he used it. No shouting, no careless noise. He listened before he spoke, measuring the moment as if weighing the risk. That behavior would later be interpreted in many ways. People would look back and assign meaning, draw lines from this silence to everything that followed. I want to be clear. At that time, there was no prophecy, no sense of destiny, no awareness of legend. There was only a 5-year-old boy who had learned too early that even the most natural parts of you can disappear without explanation. and a mother who understood that what had happened could never be erased, only integrated. That night, when he spoke to me again before bed, his voice was still soft, but it was steady. He said my name, clearly. I answered him the same way I always had, as if nothing had ever been wrong. But inside, I felt something settle, something fragile, but firm. Silence had not won, but it had left evidence. It had taught Michael caution, control, respect for something invisible yet powerful. It had taught him that sound was not just noise, it was identity, presence, proof. Years later, the world would hear his voice and think of power, range, emotion. They would call it unforgettable, unique, otherworldly. I would remember something else. I would remember a house in Gary, Indiana, a spring morning, a child staring at me in fear because no sound would come out, a single note that felt impossible, and the quiet understanding that followed. Sometimes the most defining moments don't announce themselves. They arrive silently, they leave quietly, and they shape everything that comes after. That was the day Michael learned how fragile a voice could be. And it was the day I learned how strong silence can be, not because it destroys, but because of what survives it.